Sometimes a person walks into your life and leaves a mark so deep it refuses to fade even long after they're gone. And you, without even trying, became that kind of presence, not because you were perfect, not because you said all the right things, but because you carried something rare, something that made him pay attention in a world where people forget each other so easily. You moved differently. You loved differently. You understood differently. And it's that difference, that quiet, unshakable authenticity, that lingers in his memory like a song he can't get out of his head. He tries to move on, tries to bury the thought of you under routine and distraction, but it never quite works. Because deep down, he knows what most people never admit. When someone like you shows up in your life, you don't just remember them. You feel them long after they've gone. Authenticity is one of those qualities that people often talk about but rarely understand in its true power. And when a woman carries it effortlessly, it becomes something unforgettable. Being authentic means showing up as yourself, not the version the world expects, not the version someone else wants, but the person you are when no one is watching. It's not loud or dramatic. It's a quiet, grounded confidence that doesn't need approval to exist. You don't mold yourself to fit into someone's life. You don't change your values to keep the peace, and you don't silence your truth just to avoid discomfort. Instead, you stand firmly in who you are, and that alone sets you apart in a world where so many hide behind masks. Authenticity makes people stop and pay attention because it's rare, and rarity has a way of leaving a mark that lingers long after the moment has passed. When someone meets a woman who is truly authentic, it disrupts the rhythm of the predictable. There's no guessing, no second guessing, no wondering who she will be tomorrow, because she remains aligned with herself. She says what she means, feels what she feels, and lives without pretending. That kind of presence becomes a grounding force in someone else's life. It feels real in a world filled with half-truths and emotional distance. It feels like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a room for too long. He remembers the way you spoke with clarity, the way you shared your thoughts without sugarcoating them, the way you expressed your emotions with sincerity instead of playing games. That honesty might have startled him at first because it confronts him with the truth of who he is too. And that's something not everyone is prepared to face. Authenticity means you don't chase attention because you don't need it to validate your worth. You don't perform to be admired. You simply exist in your own truth, and that presence becomes magnetic. He remembers the way you walked into rooms with your own energy, not trying to blend in, not trying to be invisible, but simply being. The world responds differently to someone who is comfortable in her own skin. It creates a sense of stability, a sense of emotional safety that makes others feel like they can also be themselves. And when a woman provides that space without forcing it, it leaves a deep imprint. He remembers the conversations that felt open, the moments that felt unfiltered, the way you made honesty seem natural instead of risky. Your authenticity also showed in the way you loved. You didn't love halfway or conditionally. You loved from a place that was real. You didn't pretend to be indifferent to protect yourself. You didn't hold back to appear strong. And you didn't manipulate emotions to gain control. You cared in a way that was genuine, consistent, and brave. That kind of love is hard to find because it requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is something most people avoid. But you embraced it. You spoke your feelings instead of hiding them. You asked questions instead of assuming, and you showed concern without expecting anything in return. That sincerity becomes etched into memory because it's the kind of love people often look for but rarely encounter. It makes a person realize what they had, even if they didn't appreciate it fully in the moment. Authenticity also means you faced your flaws without running from them. You didn't pretend to be perfect. You didn't try to appear stronger than you were. And you didn't avoid difficult conversations just to look composed. You admitted when you were wrong. You apologized when necessary. And you shared your insecurities with courage. That openness becomes memorable because it creates a bond that feels pure and unforced. He remembers the way you owned your truth, the way you dealt with conflict without fear, the way you showed your human side without shame. That level of emotional maturity doesn't fade from someone's memory because it stands in stark contrast to relationships built on avoidance and pretense. Authenticity is unforgettable because it changes people. It makes them reflect on themselves, question who they are, and wonder what they lost by not valuing something so real. It's not the loud moments he remembers, but the quiet ones, the honesty in your voice, the certainty in your choices, the steadiness in your presence. Authenticity doesn't try to leave a mark, but it does in ways that stay long after the connection has shifted. There is a certain kind of strength that doesn't need noise to be noticed, a presence that isn't loud but still fills a space in a way people remember long after they leave it. That's the kind of strength you carried. It wasn't about dominance, control, or proving anything. It was a calm, grounded energy that made others feel steady simply by being near you. People often underestimate the impact of quiet strength, but it's the kind that lingers in a person's memory because it becomes a feeling, not just an impression. When he thinks of you now, he doesn't just remember your words, he remembers the way your presence softened the edges of his day. He remembers how you moved with intention, how your emotions didn't spill chaotically but flowed with honesty and clarity. That kind of calm becomes a rare comfort in a world filled with people who are always rushing, shouting, or breaking under their own noise. A calm presence doesn't mean you were silent or passive. It means you carried yourself with an inner balance that many people spend years trying to find. You didn't react to everything, you responded. You didn't get pulled into unnecessary drama, you held your boundaries with quiet confidence. You didn't need to prove your worth because you lived in a way that made it undeniable. You showed strength in the way you handled disappointment, in the way you processed conflict without turning it into a battlefield, in the way you stayed compassionate without letting people walk over you. That subtle balance between softness and resilience becomes unforgettable because it's something people often miss only after it's gone. He remembers the way your calmness affected him. Maybe he didn't even realize it at the time, but now he understands the difference. With you, he felt less scattered. Your presence reminded him of who he wanted to be, someone more centered, more mindful, more aware of his own thoughts and actions. You had a way of grounding moments simply by being present in them. In conversations, you listen with sincerity instead of waiting to reply. In disagreements, you remained steady instead of escalating things. In emotional moments, you showed empathy instead of judgment. That emotional steadiness created a sense of safety, a feeling that he could be honest without fear of being misunderstood. People with calm strength often become anchors for others without trying. You probably didn't realize the depth of your impact then because you were simply being yourself. But for him, your energy became a place where he felt understood. He didn't have to pretend to be stronger than he was, didn't have to hide his fears, didn't have to maintain an image. Your presence created space, a space for him to breathe, reflect, and feel seen. And when someone experiences that kind of emotional grounding, it becomes nearly impossible to forget. It's not something that can be easily replaced because it doesn't come from performance, it comes from authenticity. Your strength also showed in the moments you walked away from what wasn't right for you. Calm strength doesn't cling, doesn't beg, doesn't force. It recognizes when something isn't aligned and chooses peace over chaos. That decision, too, became memorable. He remembers how you handled endings with the same dignity you carried during beginnings. You didn't lash out or crumble. You accepted, you processed, and you moved forward. People don't forget someone who remains composed even when things fall apart. It reveals a depth of character that stands out against the emotional turbulence many relationships experience. Your presence left a mark not because you demanded attention, but because you embodied balance in a world that often swings between extremes. You showed that strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's found in patience, in understanding, in restraint, in forgiveness, in the ability to stay true to yourself while navigating the complexities of human connection. That subtle, steady strength changes people without forcing them to change. It makes them calmer, braver, more self-aware. And now, when he looks back, it's that feeling he misses, the quiet reassurance, the emotional clarity, the unspoken stability you carried with you. It's not dramatic, but it's unforgettable. It stays in the mind like a peaceful moment someone didn't appreciate enough until they lost it. Loving with depth is something the world often misunderstands. People think love is about grand gestures, dramatic confessions, or constant intensity. But real love, the kind that reaches someone on a deeper level, is quiet, steady, intentional. It's the kind of love you gave. You didn't love because it was convenient or easy. You didn't show up only when it suited you. You didn't offer affection as a performance. Your love came from a sincere place, rooted in understanding, patience, and emotional honesty. That's why it stayed with him long after the relationship shifted. Deep love has a way of carving itself into someone's memory because it becomes part of the way they see themselves, part of the way they understand connection. You didn't love halfway, and that full-hearted approach is something he struggles to forget. Your love wasn't rushed. It wasn't the kind that blooms fast and fades even faster. You took your time. You studied his moods, understood his silences, listened to the things he didn't say out loud. You paid attention in a world where most people are too distracted to notice the little things. You remembered his habits, his worries, the small details that revealed who he really was beneath the mask he showed the world. That kind of emotional attentiveness hits differently because it makes a person feel seen in a way they might not have experienced before. People rarely forget the first time someone truly understood them without needing explanations. Your depth also showed in the way you cared during difficult moments. You didn't disappear when things got complicated. You didn't shut down when challenges arose. You stayed present. You supported him in ways he probably took for granted at the time. When he was lost, you didn't fix him. You stood beside him while he figured it out. When he doubted himself, you reminded him of his strengths without making him feel weak. When he made mistakes, you addressed them with honesty instead of punishment. That gentle, steady way of loving became something he leaned on more than he realized. Now, in your absence, he feels the weight of that loss because not everyone can love with that level of emotional maturity. Deep love isn't just about how you express affection. It's about how you understand boundaries, how you honor someone's inner world without trying to control it. You gave him space when he needed it, but you also held space when he couldn't speak for himself. You didn't smother him, didn't overstep, didn't demand that he match your intensity. You loved with balance. You knew when to reach for him and when to step back. That balance is rare. Some people mistake intensity for love or distance for independence, but you navigated the middle ground with grace. He remembers that now because it created a sense of harmony he hasn't been able to recreate elsewhere. Your love also had honesty, and honesty is its own kind of depth. You were open about your feelings, even the messy ones. You communicated without manipulation, expressed your concerns without drama, and shared your dreams without fear of judgment. You let him see the vulnerable parts of you, the hopes, the fears, the insecurities, and you trusted him with that truth. Vulnerability is a gift, and not everyone offers it willingly. He didn't just lose your presence. He lost the rare comfort of knowing someone loved him without hidden motives or emotional games. Deep love leaves an imprint because it transforms both people involved. You didn't just make him feel cared for, you made him feel capable of more. You held him accountable, encouraged him to grow, and reminded him that he deserved a meaningful connection. You loved him in a way that made him want to be better, even if he wasn't ready for that evolution at the time. Now, when he looks back, He realizes that kind of love wasn't ordinary. It was something he didn't know how to value until it was beyond reach. And that's the truth about loving with depth. It doesn't fade quietly, it echoes. It lingers in the spaces where someone once felt understood, supported, and emotionally safe. It becomes a memory tied not to moments, but to the person they could only be when they were with you. Your love left a mark because it wasn't fleeting. It came from a real place. It had weight, warmth, and sincerity. It was the kind of love that teaches someone what love should feel like, which is why forgetting you isn't as simple as moving on.
Mm-hmm.
There is a unique kind of beauty in a woman who brings peace instead of chaos, a woman whose presence softens the room rather than intensifies it. You carried that kind of peace, not because you were emotionless or detached, but because you understood yourself well enough to move through the world with intention. You didn't create storms where there didn't need to be any. You didn't provoke conflict to feel powerful. You didn't use uncertainty as a way to keep someone guessing. Instead, you offered stability, clarity, and a calm emotional environment that made connection feel safe. That kind of peace is rare, and because it's rare, it becomes unforgettable. He might not have appreciated it fully when he had it, but now he feels the contrast between what he experienced with you and what he encounters in the world. Peace doesn't mean you avoided difficult conversations. Rather, you approached them with maturity instead of impulsiveness. You didn't explode at small issues or turn misunderstandings into battles. You tried to understand before assuming. Your communication came from a place of clarity, not insecurity. You didn't add unnecessary weight to moments already heavy with emotion. You took time to think, to breathe, to understand your own feelings before projecting them onto someone else. That mindful approach made him feel like he could express himself without walking on eggshells, without fearing sudden anger or unpredictable reactions. People don't forget someone who makes them feel safe to speak their truth. You brought peace because your energy wasn't draining. You didn't demand constant reassurance or emotional labor to maintain your sense of worth. You knew who you were, and that self-awareness made your presence feel grounding rather than overwhelming. You didn't absorb his stress and throw it back at him in a different form. You didn't punish him for mistakes he didn't make. You didn't create tension to gain attention. Instead, you offered understanding, support, and emotional steadiness. That consistency becomes a comfort people don't fully recognize until it's gone. Once he experienced the balance you brought, everything else started to feel unstable by comparison. Your peace also showed in your ability to let moments be what they were. You didn't force joy, you created space for it. You didn't cling in fear of losing, you trusted the connection enough to let it breathe. You didn't insist on being heard through force, you were heard because your presence carried its own quiet authority. He remembers how he felt when things were good with you. They felt easy, natural, unburdened by unnecessary drama. You made love feel like a refuge instead of a battlefield. That kind of emotional sanctuary is something people crave deeply, even if they don't know how to ask for it. Peace doesn't mean you never broke down or struggled. It means you handled your emotions with self-respect. You didn't hide your pain, but you didn't weaponize it either. You shared your feelings without making them someone else's responsibility to fix. You allowed yourself to be vulnerable without collapsing into dependency. You felt everything honestly, but you navigated those feelings with grace. He remembers the times you showed your hurt with openness instead of hostility, the moments you chose understanding over retaliation, the times you prioritized healing over winning. Those memories linger because they reveal a strength that doesn't shout, it simply exists. You also brought peace by respecting boundaries, both his and your own. You didn't demand more than someone could give. You didn't stay where your worth wasn't recognized. You didn't force emotional closeness when distance was necessary. You understood that love involves rhythm, moments of closeness and moments of space, and you honored both. That healthy approach made the connection feel dignified rather than suffocating. It taught him what a balanced relationship should look like. And now, when he experiences relationships lacking that balance, he feels the difference sharply. Your presence left a mark because peace is not just a feeling, it's a memory. It becomes something a person compares everything else to. It becomes a moment they search for without knowing they're searching. He can't forget you because you weren't chaos disguised as passion. You were comfort disguised as simplicity. You made life feel less heavy, less confusing, less overwhelming. And now, in your absence, he realizes that peace isn't quiet, it's powerful. It's the kind of power that lingers long after everything else fades. There are certain people who enter your life and challenge you without ever raising their voice or demanding anything. They challenge you simply by being who they are. That's what you did. You didn't push him to grow with lectures or pressure. You pushed him simply by setting a standard through your own behavior, your values, your clarity, and your depth. When someone meets a woman who truly knows herself, who understands her worth, her limits, her goals, it forces them to reflect on who they are in comparison. You weren't trying to teach him anything, yet he ended up learning more from you than he ever expected. That's why he can't forget you. You became a quiet turning point in his life, a mirror that made him confront the parts of himself he had been avoiding. You challenged him because you didn't settle for half-hearted effort. You didn't accept excuses disguised as explanations. You didn't tolerate emotional laziness or inconsistency, not in a harsh way, but in a way that made him aware of the gaps between who he was and who he could be. You showed him through your actions what real emotional presence looked like, what accountability sounded like, what honesty felt like. Being around you made him realize the difference between trying and pretending. You didn't have to demand more from him. Your standards made him want to offer more on his own. And whenever someone inspires growth without forcing it, it leaves a long-lasting imprint. You also challenged him intellectually and emotionally. Your conversations weren't shallow. You asked real questions, the kind that made him think instead of just react. You didn't let him hide behind jokes, silence, or emotional shortcuts. You saw through the layers he used as shields and gently encouraged him to be more open. You listened in ways that made him want to be more honest. You responded in ways that made him reconsider the way he communicated. You didn't accept surface level answers when you sensed something deeper behind them. That level of emotional presence pushed him to face things he wasn't ready to face, and even though it may have scared him at the time, he now realizes how powerful that influence was. You challenged him to grow because you didn't pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. You weren't afraid to express disappointment or ask for better. You didn't let him escape responsibility for his actions or decisions. You handled conflict with maturity rather than avoidance, and that alone forced him to step up. Many people choose comfort over growth, but you chose truth. You didn't do it to be difficult. You did it because you cared about the connection. He wasn't used to someone who wanted depth instead of the easy way out. That pushed him to reconsider how he showed up, not just for you, but for himself. One of the most powerful ways you challenged him was by refusing to lose yourself in the relationship. You didn't abandon your identity to fit into his world. You didn't shrink to make him feel bigger. You didn't stop growing to make him comfortable. Instead, you kept evolving, learning, improving. Your growth acted like a silent reminder that he, too, could evolve if he chose to. And sometimes that's the hardest challenge of all, realizing that someone else is moving forward while you're standing still. He felt that. He felt the gap widening not because you walked away, but because you kept rising. You also challenged him through your emotional resilience. You didn't fall apart at the slightest inconvenience. You didn't collapse into dependency. You didn't use your pain as a weapon. You handled your own wounds with grace and asked him to handle his with honesty. That kind of strength can be intimidating to someone who hasn't yet learned to face themselves fully. You showed him what emotional maturity looked like in action. It wasn't dramatic, but it was powerful. Another way you challenged him was by expecting love to be more than just moments. You wanted consistency, effort, and sincerity, not perfection, just presence. You weren't impressed by bare minimum gestures or temporary affection. You expected emotional follow through, and that expectation challenged him to examine what he was truly capable of giving. Even if he couldn't rise to it at the time, the awareness stayed. And now, every time he falls back into old patterns with someone else, he remembers what it felt like to be with someone who didn't accept less than genuine effort. He can't forget you because growth never feels ordinary. You sparked something in him he wasn't prepared to nurture. You awakened a part of him he didn't know needed waking. You pushed him gently but powerfully toward becoming better, more honest, more present, more responsible. And even if he didn't transform while you were there, the impact remains. You didn't just touch his heart, you sparked his evolution. And that kind of influence doesn't fade. Some people come into our lives and leave an impression not because of what they did, but because of who they revealed us to be. That was you. You became a mirror he wasn't ready to face. In your presence, he saw more than just you. He saw himself reflected in ways that made him confront both his potential and his flaws. You didn't intentionally try to expose him, and you certainly didn't set out to make him uncomfortable. You simply existed with authenticity, depth, and integrity. That alone forced him to recognize parts of himself he may have ignored or suppressed. When someone shows up like that, it can be disorienting, even painful. It's easier to forget a person who fits neatly into the world we already understand. But you didn't fit neatly, and that's why he can't forget you. You reflected his potential because being around you highlighted what life could feel like with someone who is fully present, emotionally mature, and self-aware. You didn't offer superficial praise or fleeting validation. Instead, you inspired him by example. You didn't tell him to be better. You simply were better in your own quiet, consistent way that created a standard that he unconsciously measured himself against. Whether he admitted it or not, he noticed where he fell short and where he could grow. Being with you wasn't a comfort zone. It was a mirror, showing him the man he could become if he stepped into his own strength, honesty, and emotional depth. And when someone shows you that version of yourself, it's impossible to simply walk away without thinking about what might have been. At the same time, you reflected his flaws, not cruelly or judgmentally, but truthfully. He saw in you a standard of integrity and emotional authenticity that forced him to recognize his inconsistencies, his insecurities, and his unexamined behaviors. You didn't need to call them out explicitly. Your presence alone revealed what he had been avoiding. And that can be unsettling. When someone exposes your blind spots through their very existence, it's hard to forget them. Every interaction becomes a reminder not just of who they are, but of who you are, or who you aren't. Your mirror forced him to wrestle with uncomfortable truths, the kind of self-reflection most people spend years avoiding. That duality of showing potential and reflecting flaws is unforgettable because it goes beyond memory, it shapes conscience. You reflected him in ways that were subtle but profound. In the way you listened, he noticed his own tendency to deflect. In the way you loved deeply, he recognized the superficial ways he had approached connection before. In the way you handled conflict with grace, he saw the impulsive patterns he carried. In the way you lived authentically, he realized how often he had compromised himself to fit in or to avoid confrontation. You weren't a teacher, and you weren't a critic. You were a mirror, and mirrors show truth whether we are ready for it or not. That reflection doesn't fade with time because it isn't just about memory. It's about recognition, awareness, and the parts of ourselves we can't stop thinking about once they've been revealed. The pain of losing you is also tied to this reflection. He doesn't just miss you, he misses the challenge you posed to him. He misses the accountability your presence demanded. He misses the sense of possibility that being with you inspired. And even if he didn't embrace that fully at the time, the awareness lingers. He knows now that no one else can replace the clarity you brought into his life. People who serve as mirrors leave a lasting impact because they remind us of who we were and who we could have been. That combination is haunting and unforgettable. You became unforgettable not because of extraordinary gestures or dramatic moments, but because of the subtle, persistent truth you held in your being. You existed in a way that made him see, think, and feel in ways he hadn't before. You made him reflect on his choices, his capacity to love, and his readiness to confront himself. You held up a mirror he wasn't ready for, and that is why he cannot forget you. Memories fade, but the truth we see about ourselves when reflected through another person's presence endures. Your reflection has stayed with him, shaping his understanding of himself and of love in a way no one else could replicate. In the end, what makes someone unforgettable isn't just beauty, charm, or fleeting moments of connection. It's the combination of authenticity, calm strength, deep love, peaceful presence, quiet challenges, and the mirror they hold up to the people around them. You didn't try to impress, you didn't perform, and you didn't compromise who you were for anyone. You simply existed fully, and in doing so, you left an imprint that cannot be erased. He remembers you not because he wants to hold on to the past, but because you revealed truths about life, love, and himself that no one else could. You were rare, real, and transformative, and that is why he can't forget you. Some people don't just pass through our lives, they awaken us, challenge us, and change us forever. You were that person, and your presence continues to echo long after you're gone.